Hello folks, Scott here with the new My Monthly Hero March 2022 kit. Again, these are in our 8x10-inch zippered pouches. It looks like we are going from Impressionist art to modern art. Okay, this is our stamp set. We've got two large splatter stamps with 4 sentiments. I see so much in you. You are so much more than meets the eye. You're a masterpiece, and I love you for being uniquely you. Then we have this terrific cover plate die, the museum cover plate die. This is our museum window die with a large artwork against the wall, framed, a couple of people, a lady sitting, a floor, really nice museum window die with, of course, artwork that you would put right there in the center. Really interesting window die. Do we do shakers in that window? Is that modern art? This outer frame, of course, is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. We also get 4 embossing powders in our kit here. We get blue embossing powder, orange, purple, and goldenrod, 4 embossing powders. Now, we've occasionally gotten little pots of embossing powders, but these are interesting in envelopes. So obviously they're looking at us to emboss these with the embossing and watermark ink, which comes in the kit as well, an embossing ink cube. We also get 1 sheet of canvas textured cardstock. This is probably 80-pound or so, and then 2 sheets of extra thick canvas paper. A nice canvas texture on that. I think you can see that. These two are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. This, of course, is 5 1/2 by 8 1/2. That's everything in our March kit this month. Looks like we are going from the Surrealist last month, Dolly, to modern art this month. Very Jackson Pollock. More art. And here we have my 10 cards. Looks like we've got everything on a white card base, 1 gray card base right there. Now, I really couldn't wait to die cut this great cover plate die, our museum window die. And actually, I use almost the entire kit on this first card right here. And we have people at the art museum with a big splatter painting in the back. Inside it says, "You're a masterpiece." I just couldn't seem to bring myself to cover up these groovy scene on the front with a sentiment. Not yet, at least. Now, I die cut the cover plate die using 110-pound cardstock, and I did a second die cut of the patrons and the floor in the same white cardstock. It's easy to trim those out, just very few nips and tucks here and there to separate that from the big die cut. And I glued that second layer on top of the main die cut. That gives them both a little bit of dimension and kind of pulls them away from the painting, I think. Now, I stamped the larger splatter stamp with the embossing and watermark ink cube in our kit and embossed that with the purple embossing powder. And then I stamped the smaller splatter stamp using the same embossing ink and embossed that with the goldenrod embossing powder. Now, I really liked the purple and orange together. I thought that was all this piece of art needed. So I trimmed it down and I glued it behind the frame, glued those all down to a white card base, stamped the sentiment on the inside, and I just wasn't satisfied with it. I thought when the stamping was not behind the frame, it looked great, but once I put the stamping behind the frame, it looked empty. It looked like there wasn't enough there. So I reached for my Versa marker pen and just penned in the blue and the orange, which is awfully red for an orange. I penned in the blue with the Versa marker and embossed it, penned in the orange with the Versa marker, and then embossed it. That filled out that painting really nicely. It's much different than you would get just using the stamps. I think that's part of the fun of this whole kit. The embossing powders give great dimension and shine to the inks. There you can see that. It actually kind of looks like paint. So let's see how many pieces of art we can come up with using this kit. I think a little bit more attention to the picture frame might be in order. So for our second card, we've got Pow. Wow, that is certainly more dramatic than that first card. Now, I die cut the cover plate die using some 110-pound Nina Solar White cardstock, and I started coloring the frame with my Spectrum Noir alcohol markers. I was probably inordinately concerned with the depth on these cards. I wanted the picture to be behind the frame, and I wanted our patrons to be in front of the frame. So that's why I tried to color directly on this frame as it stood inside of this die cut. Well, of course, I start coloring the edges and I get it all over the place. The edges don't work. In fact, the inner line here, I just colored like the rest of the frame. That was easy to color that edge. But I got frustrated trying to color that thin line on the outside of that frame. So I just cut that thin line away completely. I just cut the whole frame basically away from the card. Actually, it stayed connected to the card because the people were holding the frame in place. So I die cut 2 more pairs of our patrons and the bench. I didn't cut the floor. I thought they needed to be a little bit more dimensional than the floor. So the floor is at the same depth as the wall. The picture frame is on top of the wall, and the picture is behind the frame. Okay, I think that makes sense. I glued those to the front of the card. I did give them just a little bit of shading with a light gray alcohol marker. That gives them a little definition while still doesn't make them pop too much. I want to see the art after all. This is the goldenrod, and the orange are the big stamps. The blue and the purple are the small splatter stamps. Everything is stamped on some pitch black cardstock and embossed with our embossing powders. I do think the more colors you use, the merrier. Let yourself go wild. I know a lot of Jackson Pollock paintings are very kind of monochrome or just 2 colors or things like that, but I think at this size, it really works nicely to get as many colors in your splatter paintings as possible. So I glued the painting to the back of the frame, and then I trimmed that whole panel down to like 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 and glued that on top of a piece of black cardstock that was cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So that gave me a thin little frame around the outside of the card, and that also filled in that thin line around the frame with black. That works very well. I ended up digging out some Love It from Lizzie peel-offs. Here's some of her black peel-offs. I use these black peel-offs to do the inside line of the frame. That makes it pop beautifully. Those peel-offs came in really handy with this kit. And of course, on the inside, I've got, I see so much in you. You can see I did stamp this and cut this out in a little banner, but I just couldn't bring myself to put it on the front of the card yet. Tell you, the frame details and the black background on the art really make that card pop. I see so much in you. So let's try some other colored embossing powders. I know Hero Arts has given us a number of embossing powders in our My Monthly Hero kits over the last couple of years. On a gray card base, now we have You Are So Much More Than Meets the Eye. Now there's a sentiment on the front that doesn't bother me at all. Again, this is the cover plate die cut from a piece of a gray cardstock. Our patrons in the bench are cut a second time from some darker gray cardstock, glued on top, a little bit of gray shading on their sides. Now this artwork is Hero Arts red embossing powder, Hero Arts yellow prism embossing powder, which gives us a nice touch of sparkle in there. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that here. And then Hero Arts green gold embossing powder, which if you look closely, you can actually see some little specks of gold in those greens. I thought that worked really nicely. I stamped the sentiment on matching gray cardstock with some intense black ink and emboss that as well with some clear embossing powder. I fussy cut that sentiment out, glued that to the front of our card with a little foam tape. You can use those splatter stamps with any colors of embossing powder you own. Let your imagination run free. But of course, you don't have to emboss those stamps all the time. You can use those stamps just with colors. Card number 4, we have color outside the lines. A great sentiment for any artist. This card tickles me to no end. I die cut the cover plate frame, again from some Neenah white cardstock, and I stamped our splatter stamps all over this using Hero Hues reactive ink. That's fruit punch and creamsicle and lemon drop, green apple, blue Hawaii, and grape slush. I just stamped those all over the place on that die cut, and then glued a piece of that canvas textured paper in the opening and glued those down to a white card base that I had already printed color outside the lines. I printed that using my Silhouette software using the Dream State and Times New Roman fonts. I thought that came very closely to matching the style of the sentiments in this kit. So then I did, of course, die cut our patrons and the bench 2 more times from 110-pound cardstock, glued those together, glued those down to our card front. That gives us some really nice shadows and dimension to them. Hey, remember, color outside the lines. I mean, it makes me giggle. What can I say? Now, of course, anyone can do splatter paint and art. In fact, when we were young, much younger, we did... we actually made buttons using splatter art. We'd cover a whole large sheet with paint splatters and swooshes and splashes, and then cut them apart and make little buttons out of them. This actually has a DJ Schiller. This was, goodness, 1981. So let's try some spatter painting of our own. Now, I am using some acrylic paints for this. These are cheap, simple Arteza acrylic paints. I've picked a mauve pale, cerulean blue, a deep yellow, and a brilliant red. I just squirted out a drop of them into 4 little palettes on my palette. I'm going to add 1-2 drops of water to each and see if that liquefies them enough so that they splatter. So I'm going to use a big O, fairly stiff brush. I should get fairly good splatters with a stiff brush. Let's go. Just right off the edge of our palette here. My paintbrush handle keeps hitting my camera. I'm going to add 1 more drop to this, maybe 2 drops. Let's add 2 drops, and let's go to a smaller brush. I think you may need a little bit of distance. That's pretty good. So that's our blue right there. I think we'll call that blue pretty good. I think Jackson Pollock must have used absolutely gobs and gobs and gobs of paint on his paintings. Art right there. We just created that in 10 minutes. 10 little short minutes sitting at your craft desk, a little acrylic paint. Let's let that dry and we'll come back to that and make a card out of it. Now, I do like this die a lot. You can do so many things in this window. There are a few little tips and tricks I think I discovered while working with this that makes this a little bit more easy to work with. The first off is these really thin lines around the frame. This is like 110-pound cardstock I cut that out of, and those can give a little bit of problems. I tried to color them on some. What I did ultimately was just go from the back with some, this is some surgical tape, really thin, very sticky. I just put that along the edges of the frame on the back, press that down. You could adjust that if need be. This is one of my favorite low-tack tapes, although it's actually quite high-tack. It just peels off quite easily. And you can see that'll keep everything nice and flat on that same level. I like using this micro pour tape because it takes glue as well very nicely. It's kind of a fabric-backed tape, so it takes glue very nicely. And now that gives us nice, clean edges, and I don't have to worry about getting those little lines glued down when I glue this to the front of my card. Now, there's also a great bang for your buck to be gotten by coloring this frame. I actually just die cut the frame part from a piece of cardstock. This is some textured cardstock, and I'm going to cut the frame away from that. So I'm just cutting the inside frame. I'm leaving the side pieces on, both on the inside and the outside. You've got like two little holding places on the outside there. They, of course, have to connect to our people. This is our single frame piece there. Cut that away from our little lady here. And that should all come free. Inside corner here. There you go. And now we've got a frame. I've got the mid frame here, so that will leave white on the edges of that. I really like that. Just some simple liquid glue down the frame part. Liquid glue makes it easy to slide everything into position. Our little centerpiece there. Really nice, easy frame that will accentuate anything you put behind there. So I saw online a lot of people who were coloring their people in the museum here. I figured that I should color at least one set of people in the museum. And I also love making these people thicker, adding an extra layer or two. So that's what we're going to do here. I've got my painted pieces. I've got my extra little add-on thickness pieces. So I don't think you have to put foam tape behind these people at all. Just glue 2 or 3 layers together and they automatically look like they're sitting or standing in front of the picture and in front of the frame. So here is my spatter art all dried up. I did de-emphasize those lines I painted from that purple blob in the middle there. I just used some gold Sharpie to kind of break up those lines. We've got our colored frame and museum goers, and we can pick what is the best part of this to use. I think that looks like fun. So I'm just going to quickly mark the ends of my painted piece. And I'm going to chop those off. And the other side, I think just right about there is the great spot for that. So I'm going to flip this over, and let's just draw a quick line across the top and bottom. That tells me where my glue goes to hold this piece in place. I don't have to worry about all of those little pieces of the frame because they are all taped down already. Follow our people along there, right on the edge, a little on her head, a little on our standing gentleman. And then we place this back, matching up our lines, and flip that over right about where we wanted that. I went ahead and printed this on some 110-pound cardstock. It's cut to A2 card size, so that's 5.5 by 8.5. We just score it at 4 1/4 and reinforce that crease both sides. There's our card base. You color my world. An excellent little sentiment to go along with this kit. And then I'm going to add another piece of cardstock at the bottom over here, just to make sure everything is the same thickness as we glue that down to our card base. If I want to be really anal retentive, we'll add a little piece up here. I happen to have some extra cardstock here. I think we'll do that. A nice, even, smooth back to glue down to our card front. So let's do it. Make sure our card base is facing the right way. Our card front is facing the right way. Let's glue them together. There you go. We've got some really nice shine and sparkle on that artwork there using acrylic paints. Of course, we'll do that. Nice texture to that. I do feel like the people are kind of competing with the art. I like that splatter. Anybody can do splatter art. You know, this is interesting. I think the scale of the spatters on this painting are a little bit more to the proper scale of the painting size and the patrons. I tell you, it almost looks a little Jackson Pollock to me. Of course, he probably just rolled over in his grave right there. You color my world. Of course, you don't have to use that cover plate die to use the splatter stamps in the kit. Now, one advantage to these stamps is that you can create something seemingly random in just no time at all. These stamps should come in really handy over the years to create some really nice arty backgrounds. And so for card number 6, we've got I love you for being uniquely you. Pink. Pink. This is stamped and embossed using some a peony purple Love from Lizzie embossing powder. I wanted it's about the most bright, garish embossing powder I had, and this is it. I tell you though, this is a pink I can really live with. It has a really nice purple tone to it. I stamped the smaller splatter stamp on the top and bottom of this little panel here, embossed that with the purple peony embossing powder, stamped and embossed the sentiment in white. This is all on pitched black cardstock. I die cut that with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die, added a thin white mat, then glued those down to another panel cut with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die, and then glued those down to my white card base. I love you for being uniquely you. And look how nicely that splatter stamp fills up that whole card. Now, the simple fact that we have this "You're a masterpiece" sentiment in this kit means I had to make a card like this. I could not resist. Card number 7, we've got "You're a masterpiece" with a mirror on it. There you go. You can see me there. Really nice mirror there. I am so tickled. I got this mirror stuff over Christmas. It's just a plastic mirror. I'll try and include a link to it below down in the description. But it's this kind of a hefty plastic. It won't die cut, but it does cut with my guillotine cutter or with scissors very easily. This is covered with some thin plastic, of course. There you go. You can see the real silver right there. I am loving that stuff. I think it's so much fun to send a card to somebody that they see themselves in the card right there. You're a masterpiece. So I created my own frame for this card using 2 Hero Arts Infinity square dies and some gray cardstock. And then I filled it in with a piece of that great mirror plastic. I die cut the floor and the patrons and the bench once, and then die cut 2 more sets of the patron and the bench, glued those together, glued those down to my floor piece, glued those down to the front of my A2 card base, and then slipped my frame in the back right behind them, glued their heads down to that frame. Good dimension on them. Looks like they're standing in front of that mirror beautifully. And of course, because this is a square instead of a rectangle, it gave me room on top to stamp this sentiment. You're a masterpiece. Hello. Okay, so when was the last time you were searching for something on the internet and this suddenly shows up on your screen? This image is no longer available. I'm sorry. Am I getting a little too serious here? In the context of an art museum, this tickles me so much. I don't think you can get any simpler and yet say quite so much. Only 110-pound cover plate die for this piece. I printed this sentiment on a scrap of that canvas texture paper. This image is no longer available. And so, of course, on the inside we have support the arts. If you know me at all, you know I've spent a lifetime working in the arts, mostly theater arts, but it has truly provided me with a career and a lifetime of employment. And I certainly know that all arts institutions need as much support as they can get. So support your local art institution. And that's today's lecture. Thank you. So that card got me to thinking about how we consume art in these modern times, and especially in the last couple of years. So for card number 9 here, we've got 21st century art with the QR code. I really love this black and white card. It thrills me quite a lot. Of course, the cover plate die is die cut from some pitch black cardstock. Our patrons and bench are cut from some dark gray cardstock and then highlighted with little touches of a sea salt reactive ink and my little micro brush applicators, just little bits of highlight on them. I printed this QR code and the sentiment on another scrap of that canvas textured cardstock. Now this QR code is actually an active QR code. You should be able to stick your phone on that code right now and go where it tells you. I'm not going to tell you where it'll take you, but I think it's a fun place to go. 21st century art, beautiful black and white card. Of course, these again are Love from Lizzie peel-offs. These are clear peel-offs with little gold edges on them. That black pinstripe that gives us down the center is just classy as all get out. I think I really like the looks of this. Black, white, and gold, you can't beat it. 21st century art. I challenge you to follow this QR code and tell me about it. So as you can probably tell, I was die cutting a lot of our patrons and benches out. Almost all of these have got at least one extra layer. I think this is the only card that doesn't have an extra layer of our patrons. I was doing a lot of that die cutting, and in order to conserve cardstock, I started doing partial die cutting. So I cut just the guy and the girl from one half of a A2 panel, and then I'd cut the guy and the girl from the other half of the cardstock. Well, most of the time, this is what you'd come up with. This was really close. One time, I did a partial die cut in 2 directions, and the piece that came out was perfect. I didn't even plan it. It was a total surprise. When I saw that perfectly double die cut piece, I knew I had to make a card out of it. Card number 10, and we have everything's relative. If you look, you should be able to tell that that is the M.C. Escher picture that has all of the staircases going in different directions and people walking up and down them. And here we have our patrons in two different directions, one above the other. Believe it or not, this drawing of Escher's is actually called Relativity and is probably one of his most famous pieces. Relativity, yes. Everything's relative. Now there's encouragement for you. Now, of course, I also used some Love from Lizzie peel-offs to define our truncated frame here. These are some little kind of brushed silver peel-offs. And there's also a little bit of magic to this card. I figured if they were looking at this picture from both sides, that we should be able to look at the picture from both sides and see the same sentiment. So we've got everything's relative. And you turn it the other direction, open the card, and you've got everything's relative. And one more time, open the card, and you've got everything's relative. Of course, that's just two card bases glued to each other. Everything's relative are on opposite sides. So whichever way you turn it, it opens to the right and says everything's relative. This card will never go in an envelope the wrong direction. Everything's relative. This is a perfect encouragement card with lots of humor to cheer somebody up. I love this one. And just like that, we've wrapped up my 10 cards created with the My Monthly Hero March 2022 kit. Those splatter stamps, those are perfect stash builder stamps, and that cover plate die is just as versatile, and I'm sure we'll see lots of use over the years. I think this is a terrific group of encouragement cards with a couple of thoughtful notes along the way. It's been a long time since I've done a card kit and done all 10 cards in a portrait orientation. And of course, I did manage to use all of the stamps in this stamp set. I think I do really like keeping the museum patrons monochromatic and letting the art shine. Of course, you could put these guys in front of the mountains, in front of the ocean, in front of a beach, they could be looking at anything. In fact, Libby even put them in an aquarium and turned the picture frame into an aquarium with fish swimming through that, which is, of course, perfect. They could be looking at anything. Now, I did consider using many different images as the art on these cards from my little Dolly ripoff last month. I thought about that, even to that city cling stamp from the December kit that I painted, that whole city cling stamp. Thought about putting that in the window. I even thought about putting some recognizable art. You could put Mona Lisa in that frame and open up the card and it says smile on the inside. I tell you, the possibilities are almost endless. This kit is still available at Hero Arts. I hope I was able to inspire the artists in you and give you some fun ideas on how to use these stamps and dies. If you're ready to start framing up your own artwork and want to grab a kit for yourself, please use my links when you do order from Hero Arts. It helps support this channel and keeps me stocked with papers. Thank you so very much for sharing your time with me here. I hope I was able to bring a smile to your lips and share a little inspiration with you as well. Please remember to like me, list me, pin me, post me, share me with all of your friends. Remember, don't run with scissors. And I send you and yours love and laughter, warm days and restful nights. And as always, happy crafting. For more detailed information, better pictures, and product links, please visit my website at cardcutups.com.